Welcome to Metal in Focus.
I've got 46 states in 3 different countries. My victims never knew what was going to happen. I've had shootings, knifings, strangulations, beatings, and I've participated in actual crucifixions of the humans. All across the country, there's people just like me who's set out to destroy human life.
Niggas trying to talk about Halo 3. You know what I'm saying? Man, they best rename that shit to Galo.
Ice coffee. Okay, good. Fine.
Thank you. Please enjoy.
It's episode 86 of Radio Free Innsmouth. This week, I thought before we got into the autism proper, I would share with you a new album that a IRL friend, and yes, I do have those, has made me aware of. This is Departure Chandelier's Antichrist Rise to Power. Now, if you've never heard of Departure Chandelier, it's a side project collaboration of guys from Akitsa, the fairly famous Quebecois black metal band, and Ashpool, who I think are from New York, and I've never heard of them. I might check them out because I really like this Departure Chandelier album quite a bit. They have a fairly focused concept, which is illustrated by this quotation on the back of the booklet. Beware, by purchasing, obtaining, trading, or even listening to this morbid declaration, you are supporting the spirit of self-coronation, misanthropy, hatred, blood feuds, corruption, armed resistance, cruelty, nepotism, injustice, regionalism, sadism, and superstition. Well, yikes, that's a little bit scary, but it helps explain what they're all about. See, the album is called Antichrist Rise to Power, and it has a picture of Napoleon on the front, Napoleon Bonaparte, and on the back it says Napoleonic War Black Metal, and there are songs like Sacrifice to the Corsica Antichrist. So their vision of Napoleon is one as sort of this Byronic hero, a tragic hero who's heavily flawed and consumed and destroyed by those flaws, which is how a lot of the Romantics saw Napoleon. He was a potent symbol for them, but at the same time, Napoleon is going through all this effort to unite all of these diverse cultures under one shared system, which has very Antichrist-like properties if you've read the Book of Revelations and are familiar with the esoterica surrounding that. So it's worth noting that Akitsa is a very punk-influenced black metal band, and that punk stuff is on full display in Departure Chandelier, but watch what they do with this kind of shit. We got this sort of melodic black metal being played over a punk beat and this grinding, very hardcore punk bass, leading into some very interesting and majestic melodic black metal. Having these super punky riffs with the ostentatious keyboards is an interesting dichotomy, and it plays well into their overall concept. I would highly recommend getting this album if you can find it. It's out on Nuclear War Now Records right now, and it's part of a ongoing trend on that label of they're kind of getting away from just the straight up war metal stuff and going into more bizarre and melodic ventures. And this is the cream of the crop. Apparently it was recorded back in 2010 in sort of like a recorded live style, but it's only been released now. So for me, this might be my album of the year. I also really did like that Devil Master album I brought up a while ago. So now we're getting into the main subject. Last week we talked about good old Misery's Omen, which featured members of Cauldron, Black Ram, and Sacriphyx, and they're also in a bajillion other bands. They're all in Murkrat, and some of them are in Mournful Congregation, some Stargazer, Portal, a whole bunch of different Australian bands, but it's basically two camps of people. One camp was mostly all associated through Cauldron, Black Ram, and the other camp was associated through Stargazer. But this week we are going to be talking about Cauldron, Black Ram, and Innsmouth. They're interesting bands because both of these groups of guys, had these death metal sort of projects before they linked up for Misery's Omen, or rather they were sort of running concurrently with their collaboration in Misery's Omen. And both of these projects, Cauldron, Black Ram, and Innsmouth, have somewhat similar but also very different sounds. So it's part of why they've been successful collaborators as musicians, I think. Now, first of all, Cauldron, Black Ram. They got a little bit of melody in there. It's mostly of the bolt thrower variety, but, you know, these guys were also in Misery's Omen, so you got your melodic riffs, but you also have a hefty dose of ye old-fashioned 80s hardcore punk. Check out that fucking D-beat. Holy shit. What is this, a Discharge album? But they play these really groovy, nasty riffs over that. In addition to the 80s hardcore, there's a bit of modern hardcore going on in their songs, too. It's debatable whether or not this is actual modern hardcore influence, or if they were just influenced by the same Swedish death metal bands like Entombed that influenced a lot of that more modern beatdown style hardcore. But whatever the case, it sounds really cool when Cauldron, Black Ram do it, because they can use their very adept drumming and sense of rhythm to kind of futz it up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting than just straight up groovy riffs. I would say that they're a band that maybe the riffs aren't that complex, but the rhythms themselves are very complex. They have a bit of a pirate vibe to them, but it's more just that they occasionally do sing about skullduggery and such, but they use this very strange Old English, but also weirdly avant-garde grammatical stuff that fits with the barbarous yet elegant nature of what they're doing. And the utilization of swing beats leads to that rhythmic complexity I was alluding to earlier. Like, this is a very weird riff, rhythmically. Very weird rhythmically, even if the notes themselves are just standard chromatic progressions. When they couple it with that weird timing and the rolling double bass, it gives everything a very interesting feel to it. That is quite unlike anything I'd heard at the time or since then outside their semi-brother band Innsmouth, who do some similar kinds of stuff. These guys are the masters of pairing together kind of little riff couplets. So this would be the main riff, this galloping thing, and then it has an interchangeable tail. So they can end it like that, or they go back to the galloping again. And there's other ways they can end it besides this little suffocation riff. There's also variation in how that riff starts. They've moved it up a bit on the neck. And there's another way to end that riff that's pretty interesting. But it's not always dissonant. We can also make that riff a bit more melodic, like that. So overall, very well put together songs. They have 3 albums and an EP. The first album is kind of their grand mission statement. It's probably the most unique sounding one. It's the one that's got the most rhythmic strangeness to it. The second one is substantially more melodic. And the third one is very dark and cavernous and has a bit more black metal influence than the other ones. As for Innsmouth, well, they have a more Lovecraftian concept, as you could tell by the name. So instead of 16th century through 19th century debauchery, degeneracy, and violence, these guys are turn of the 19th into 20th century occultic spookiness. I like how they layer in these subtly creepy melodies, which makes sense because besides the drummer who was in Sacriphyx, the other guys in this band were with him in Stone Wings, who are a very under-noticed melodic death / doom metal band from Australia that sadly haven't put anything out in forever. And in fact, this might have been the genesis of Misery's Omen, was that some of the Cauldron Black Ram guys were in Mournful Congregation, the Innsmouth / Sacriphyx guys were in Stone Wings. They did a split together because they both had somewhat similar styles of doom metal, you know. They get introduced that way. There's been a lot of cross-pollination between these two groups of musicians, and as you can tell, it's been very fruitful artistically. In fact, Radio Free Innsmouth was a name I'd had floating around in my skull for a very long time before I even got that politically involved, and it was largely thanks to this band, who are one of my favorite death metal bands of all time, even though they only ever did this 6-song album. These are really interesting, spooky, tremolo-picked melodies, and the slightly mocking quality is interesting too. With the epic amount of reverb on the vocals and the somewhat dusty guitar sound, I detect a bit of Grand Belial's key influence, which is also present in Cauldron Blackground. Sorry, this is one of my favorite riffs of all time, this little bit of bolt thrower inspired goodness here, with a very apocalyptic feel to it, which is appropriate given the band's Lovecraftian concept. Rolling double bass there. I like the slow rolling double bass, reminiscent of Bolt Thrower, of course. Bolt Thrower, Grand Belial's Key. Two good bands to pull influence from and do something new with, which is what both of those bands did this week on RFI. So hopefully you enjoyed a further explanation of the strayin' metal goings-on outside of the more well-known bands like Disembowelment and Destroyer 666. Tune in next week where I'll talk about some other stuff. Not sure what yet. I guess we'll find out. You'll know when I know. Or you'll know a couple days after I know.
本日もご視聴ありがとうございました。この動画が良かったらグッドボタンとチャンネル登録ぜひぜひお願いします。バイバーイ。
Oh, well, it's really quite funny. I was in bed sleeping at 2 o'clock this morning. My wife comes in and says, oh, the shop's been, someone ran into the shop. And I said, oh, what? So I jumped out of bed and all I had was my undies on, and I walked out the front and I've seen the car smashed, and I've seen the bloke walking back to the car. And so I've walked outside and I said, oh, what are you doing, mate? Like, you can't be leaving the scene. And he goes, don't be a hero, mate. And I said, I'm not trying to be a hero, but the police are coming. And he just decided he'd scoot up the road, and I just said, nah, it's not going on like that, mate. So I jumped in my car, and I started chasing him up the road, and then he went down a side street, and then the police were coming, and I flashed them and sent them off in the direction of him. But, mate, all I had was me jocks on. I was chasing him up the street, and I'm just like, mate.